for the backend. So for the recap, in case you joined us for the very first time, you can see people are saying the repo has a 404 error. Maybe I can reshare the repo again. Just a moment, just give me a second. Okay. Right, so we first of all started by doing an introduction about what entails to be a front-end developer and what it entails to be a back-end developer, and how being a full stack developer, you get to do what the front-end and the back-end developer does. And now this one gives you an advantage over the two, because you understand the two worlds, right? You understand the two worlds. The second, I'm trying to access the repository so that I can reshare the link. So today I want us to be more practical. If you are close to your machine, right? If you're seated in front of your machine, you can try to code along with me, right? So just a point of correction, what we did last time is we managed to set up the backend. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you guys where we reached, and also as I'm doing a recap of what we did in the last session. Okay, so I believe, please confirm if you can see my screen from your end with a thumbs up. The thumbs up. All right, you can see you guys are responding. So I think so. First of all, we started by asking people to set up their developer environment. So setting up the developer environment, there's also a document in that particular repository. Let me try to access it. There is a detailed instructions on how you can set up the developer environment in that, because you need to set up for the front end, you need to set up Node.js, and for the back end, you need to set up Python, at least to have a Python 3.10. This is the repository, so at least you need. So this whole part basically explains how you can set up the backend, the front end environment. So the operating system that you need to have installed. If you are using Windows, you need to have at least to install WSL, because everything that we'll do, we are doing in the Linux platform or the Unix-based operating system. So that could be Ubuntu or it could be a Mac OS. And once you have that, you need to install at least Git bash. Okay, if you don't have WSL ready, you can just install Git bash in your Windows. This one will allow you to run the Linux command on the Windows environment. But if you manage to install WSL, then this one is good, because you'll be able to run both Ubuntu or any other Linux operating system, especially Ubuntu, Kali, and all those. And if you have a Mac OS, you're basically set, because Mac OS and Linux, they both have the Unix operating system at the core. So basically the commands are technically the same. And also now for the front-end development, you need to install either NVM to just manage the Node versions that you need to have, Node.js. So with NVM, you can run multiple versions of Node.js, but you can install version 18, right? At least version 18 of Node.js to have it run. So there's instruction on how to do that and how to get the right commands to do calculations. Same with the backend, you need to have at least a Python 3.10 and something above there, and you also need to install it. Of course, now we also need to have to run our application in a Python, either in a Python virtual environment. So you also need to install a bit of a virtual environment manager. So if you can have venv or you can install pipenv, any of those two would work for you to manage, but preferably you can install pipenv. So yeah, so once you're set, so that is the developer environment. We are not going to do that now, but if you have done that, if you're in our first session and you manage to do that, well and good. So once you have this set, then now you can come here and in your terminal and set up a directory. So what we did is we set up a directory because what you're building is it's kind of like a social media website, somewhere you can post an image and people can be able to see that, they can be able to like and comment on that particular image, right? And so that's what we're building. So first of all, we set up a directory here. Right? So this directory, maybe let me zoom in a bit. Put like just confirm with a thumbs up if you are able to see my screen clearly. I mean, you're able to see the fonts. Okay, so I can see people are confirming that. Right, so the structure of our directory looks like this. So let me just do ls lay. Right, so we have these two directories. We have the backend and we also have the front end directory. So our backend here is going to hold the API bit. So I'll start with the backend first because it's kind of like complete from my end. And if you have access to the repository, if you go to the branch, so we have like several branches. Social media. So Git branch. So you'll see we have several branches. You'll see that you have several branches on the, but the branch that is the main branch here is the one that has the previous code, the code that we did last. So I've been just completing what we did, but I'll just take you through. We'll not do much of the coding. I just want to take you through how I built the API bit. Right. So the first thing that we did is install Python, and then of course we have pipenv, and through pipenv we can be able to activate the environment, the virtual environment. So in this particular place, I can do pipenv, or maybe before I do that, I can just open this, or maybe let me just do it from let me just open this. The backend. So I'll open the backend using VS Code. So we are using VS Code as our IDE. I think is the most. I think it's the most resourceful. I think IDE out there. But of course, you can use any IDE that you're comfortable with. But for this particular session, we are going to use VS Code, right? So once we had Django, so we can activate the virtual environment using pip env shell. So shell here, it's important that you work in a virtual environment to avoid for things like, because Python works with what we call modules or packages, Python packages. Or modules that you can install because it supports code reusability, so you don't have to build stuff from scratch, so you can actually build stuff using other people's code, which makes it easier. So for you to manage those packages, you need to work in a virtual environment, which we already have over here. So as you can see, I'm running now inside a virtual environment, so this is okay. And then from here, we can install now the packages and the packages that we have, we started with last time. We have this pip file that lists all the packages that we need. So right now we have a Django installed. So the first thing that you need to do is to do pip env install Django. Of course, now I've already done that. And the advantage of using pip is that you will be able to track all the packages that you have using this package file, the Python package file or the pip file. So this one is going to list all the packages, and it's very good when we deploy, then the server will be able to know which packages to install, because once we deploy, we don't deploy with the packages. The packages remain in our developer machine. So the server needs to install them. And of course, now the server uses this particular file to know which packages to install. And now we also have Django REST. So Django REST is basically, because we are building an API, an application programming interface, whereby we are going to expose some endpoints that is going to point to our resources that we want to manage, or some database entities that we are working with, right? So we are going to use the REST technology, whereby using REST we can build a very robust APIs using REST. So using Django REST framework, it facilitates that. Because we don't want to build everything from scratch, we can actually use existing. And Django is actually, it comes packaged with some tools that makes building the backend very easy, right? So I recommend, if you have time, you can look at the documentation for that, and also Django. So the moment we install Django, we create an application, a project, right? So because you need to have a Django project. So the Django project that we have is what we call here social media. So we use the command for building a project. So once Django is installed, we can use now, of course, now we use Django admin to be able to set up the project. So if you want to set up a project, you do Django admin, and then you can say start Django, start project, and then you can specify the project name, right? So the project here basically means that you can have multiple application running in the same project. But you can, so if you have like an API and you have other services that run that run other things on the side, like for example analytics and all those things that support your API, they can still run as a supporting project on the same as a supporting application on the same project. So you can do that. So you start by creating a project. After you've created a project, you make sure that you are inside the project folder. So once you build that, the folder structure that you'll have everything that I have over here. Maybe let me zoom in again, except the API bit. So so that particular command will create this folder, and inside the folder you'll have this other folder which has almost the same name, and also you'll have this manage.py file. So this one now is the one that is going to enable you. So you need to be in this particular directory. So you need to cd into social media. So here, if I do cd into social media like that, I'm in that directory. So from there now I can be able to build. I can say Python manage.py, and then I can say create application, right? So I can create now the application that I want my API to be in. So I can actually say start application, and then I give the application name, right? So start up, and then I put the name. So the name of my application is social media underscore API. Right? So you need to set up that. So from this particular directory, once the application is created, now here is where we are going to put all our code that is going to to run our API, right? So once that is set up, you also need to do other things like making sure that And before I say that, the kind of database that you're going to use for this particular, mainly for this particular session, or in this particular webinar, we are going to use SQLite. Right, so we're going to use SQLite database because we just want to build something very quick, very fast. But you can also use other databases like MySQL. You can also use Postgres, whichever that you feel comfortable. So I recommend actually those other MySQL, if possible. If you're doing a production, kind of an application, don't use SQLite because it's a bit limiting. Because it saves most of the data in a single file, right? So the single file that I'm talking about here is this particular file here, db SQLite3, is the file that holds all our data, right? It's held there. So if this file exceeds a particular limit, probably the limit that you have been given, the storage limit that you have, then that will pose some challenges, right? And it's also very risky to just have this file hanging anywhere in your machine. So I'd recommend using MySQL or MySQL, or you can use Postgres, which can actually be run in their own server. Like you can allocate a server that runs that particular database for scalability and also for performance. But for this particular project, we'll use SQLite. So you need to have, so we need that. So the other thing that we did, or if you are you've just joined, you need to set up the schema, the database schema for Django. So at the very beginning, this particular file will not be there, right? So what you need to do is to run the migration, right? So the first thing that you need to do is to do a Python manage, and then do migrate. So migrate is basically going to create some database tables, right? So it's going to create some database entities that comes with Django, because Django has an admin whereby you can manage or you can monitor whatever is in the database, right? So for you to be able to set up that, you need to first of all do migrate. So migrate basically is a command that creates a database schema, right? So it will populate the database with the right tables that you need to start with. So that is what that does. And if I can be able to visualize this database, if I can try to see this particular DB. For you to be able to see this, you need to install SQLite. I'm going to list all those things in the repository, everything that you need. But now, if you visualize this particular data, you'll be able to see some of these tables, like the out group, all these are the ones, the Django admin, blah, blah, blah. So the ones that you're seeing here, Django and out, those are the ones that we need to, when you run this particular command the very first time, it will create this table to just be able to set up the admin part of Django, right? So you need to make sure that you do that. So what that basically does is, if I run this application, right? So you can also run the application using, so once everything is set up, you can run this application using Python manage.run server. So this what this does is it will open up a port that points to our application. So we can open this and we'll be able to see that okay, for this, so we don't have anything at the index, but we can see the admin that has this particular access to this admin portal, right? So we have access to this admin portal whereby, first of all, you will not be able to access this if you don't have a username and a password. So that now takes us to the next step. And the next step here is to, let me just stop this first. Control C to terminate. So after you've confirmed that it's actually running, you can now create there. You can say a Python manage, create, super user. So super user. So this one now gives you the access to, so once you create the super user, it's going to request for a username and a password, and of course an email. Right? So you'll have to create those three: username, email, and password. So with those ones, you can be able now to access the admin part of Django. And yes, so you'll be able to access that. So I had already done this. So let me go back to running this. And so we can now visualize this thing better from the perspective of just hope I can remember my password. Okay, let me use a different browser because this one did not save my password, unfortunately. Um, Yeah, this one had already saved my password. So initially, the first part here is what now will be set up, right? So you'll always have the users and the groups. Right? So once that is set, the other step is to start creating your database model, right? So I'll open here how we structured the database. So I'll just open it very quickly. I hope I'll be done with this recap as soon as possible. So Django, sorry, DB diagram. So there's this tool called DB diagram. You can use it to create a mind map or a representation of how you're going to structure your database, how you want your database to look like, how you want those entities to relate to one another. So the entities here are basically because you're building an application, a social media application, you need people to use that application, you need them to create profiles, you need them to do posts. So how does all these relate to one another? So you need to be able to have that structure somewhere that you can reference to, and that of course now you can be able to, your mind is actually clear on what you want to build. So this is taking a while. See if it's going to load faster if I just access the dashboard first. It seems to be a bit slow. All right, so let's give this time to load. I don't know why it's taking that long, but we can give it time to load. So basically what that had is a picture or maybe a diagram representation of what we are going to build, which are which we call in Django, we call them models. So model is actually a representation of a database table, right? So that's what we build, the models. So we'll come back here. And how we build those models, remember now we are working, we'll be doing everything in here, in this particular folder here called social media API. So the first thing that we did is to build these models. So these models are the code representation of our database tables. So it's our database tables or database entities represented in code. So that's what we first do. So we don't create them directly, but rather we create this model. So we had a model for the profile, which the model for the profile has a full name, an avatar, a phone number, and an email. And of course, all these have a type, right? Because you need to specify the type of data that you will be saving in this particular attributes. Remember, we are building this using Python classes. So we are leveraging on the Python classes or the the OOP, the object-oriented feature of Python, whereby we build those object blueprints using classes. So we are using the classes to build the models, which basically a class is a blueprint for generating objects, right? So the object that we have here is a profile, and this profile has these particular attributes. So we have the full name, the avatar, which basically is the image, the name, the type of name. So it's in form of characters, and we need at least 50 characters for that. The avatar here is also in characters, but we'll have to change this. This one is going to be changed because it's going to be an image. So this is going to change a bit. And then, of course, we had the phone number in form of characters as well, and the email. And of course, because this profile needs to be attached to a user, right? The person who signs it. So we get to have a field or a foreign key, right? It's a foreign key. For this one, I said one-to-one, but later we'll see how this is going to change to a foreign key. So it points to a foreign key in a table called user, right? So we need to build that to basically relate this profile to a user, the person who signs it. So that is for the profile. And of course, now for the post, we also need to relate a post to the person who posts that particular post. So in this particular, in the more updated code, you will see that we are not relating it to the user directly, but rather we are relating this to the profile itself, the profile that is going to post. And of course, now we have the message and the media or the photo or the image that this person is going to post. And then down here we have the comments, and of course now the comments also relate to a post using a foreign key. So the foreign key is actually, so all these particular tables have a unique ID, right? They have a unique ID. Maybe I can expose that from the database here so that you can get an understanding. Stop. So if I come here and go to the table for the profile, for example, if I go to this particular table, or maybe expand it like this, you'll be able to see that this particular class here, once you do this, it's going to be presented like so. Each and every post or each and every profile will have its unique ID. And then now to relate a post or maybe a post to a profile, we'll use the ID of the profile, which we are calling now the foreign key. So the foreign key is an ID of the related table, right? And we are going to see those relationships, which are one-to-one relationship, one-to-many. So one-to-many basically means like a particular user, or maybe a particular user might have many posts, right? So that's a one-to-many relationship. You might have others that are called, a one-to-one relationship, like a user can only have one profile. So that is a one-to-one relationship. And there's a way that you can represent that using when you're creating the model. And then you also have the many-to-many relationship, whereby a user can have many friends, and the user can be a friend of many, right? I don't know if that sounds right, but of course there's that particular relationship which we are not going to touch on this particular session. So we build all these models, and remember, every time you build a model or you make an update to a model, for that particular update to reflect in the database. Remember, we are not doing this directly in the database. There's a way you can do that directly in the database, but because we want to stay bug free, we don't want to mess up our application. This application, eventually you might have people working on it, a team working on that, and of course now you need to follow a certain procedure, development process, right? That is not going to complicate for each and every team member that is building this application. So you need to maintain a certain way of doing things. So once you make a change in the model, for example, if I change the relationship of this particular post here, instead of using a one-to-many, if I go here and say I'll use a foreign key instead, of that, then this particular change, for it to reflect, I need to make migration. So make sure that every time you do any change, you always come back to your terminal and say Django, Python manage. Oh, this is in the wrong directory. Maybe let me cd to social media, and then Python manage. You make migrations. So this particular command, what it does is every time I say make migrations, it will generate a migration file, right? So the migration files, all of them are here, right? So every time I create, I do some changes, I make migrations. So the migration, it creates a migration file like this one, right? Which we don't have to create manually. So Django does this automatically. It creates all this piece of code for doing a migration, or for doing some changes into your database, right? So it will generate every time you make some change, you make migration, it will generate a migration file. This migration file is very important because the developer you're collaborating with, the moment they pull that code to their side, they need to know which tables they should work, or which the scheme of your database, how they need to structure the DB for this application to run. So all they need to do is to come here and say, migrate, right? So they do migrate, and migrate is going to generate all the tables for the models that we have. So each and every model here will be represented in the database the moment you do Python manage migrate, right? And as long as you have already created the migration. So now that particular commands will generate each and every table that is represented by these particular models. And then, of course, now after that, you need to register this model so that they can reflect in the admin. Right? So this part over here, initially it's not there, it's not available. So after you've created your model and you've done the migrations, you need now to come to this particular file, to the admin file here, and register all the models, so that the admin site, so you're registering this in the admin site. So you're telling the admin to include this particular model so that you can have the visibility for this, right? So this one is going to give you, and you can be able now to track the people who have registered, basically giving you an admin that is, it's not that robust, but it's an admin for just managing, knowing the statistic, how many people have been there, how many posts are there. So it's very small things, right? So you can have that admin, so you can register those models for that to happen. So that is as far as setting up the model, and as far as setting up the admin to have a visual of what is happening. Because once you deploy, you need, as an administrator, you need to know what is going on, how are people responding to the application and all those things. So that is as far as that is concerned, right? I don't know if there's any question in regards to what I've talked about. I'll also share a to-do list. There's a particular to-do list I'm using. I will share it of a step-by-step guide on how to do those installations. I might actually include it in the GitHub repository. Any question as far as setting up Django and the models, and making sure that you have visibility on that in the admin. Mic check. If you together, just respond with the thumbs up in the chat. If you have been following, can see one person has responded. I can see Kent, Diva, Jekonia. Forgive if I pronounce your name wrong. Please don't mind. Sean, right? But I can see people are following. So the next bit here is now building, because we want to expose this to a front end, right? So we want to have a front end that will leverage on what we are building in the back end here. So we do that by exposing API endpoints. And we talked about Django REST. So after installing, we need to install Django REST. So let me just expose this here. So we need this particular module, Python module called Django REST. So we need to install it. So once it's installed, we also need to register by the every bit of module, an external module that we install, you need to register it in the settings. So you need to go to the settings here and make sure you go to the installed app. So these are the settings of your project. In this particular section where it's written installed app, you need to register each and every module that you're going to use here. Like for example, I installed Django REST, so I need to register it here, right? So that I'm able to use the libraries within that particular module. The same thing with the API, the application that we created, the Django application that we created. We also need to register it. So we are registering it here. So we are saying social media api.app.social media API config. This particular this thing points to the configuration file, which is here. Points to this configuration file here. So apps dot social media API configs. So we need also to register that, right, to the project, right? We need to include it in the installed apps. So once we've included this, for us now to have an API, first of all, we need to also, okay, first of all, we have already registered it here. The second thing that we need to do is to create a URL for our API. Remember, to expose the API, you need to have endpoints, right? To have the endpoints that point to the entities that you're exposing for that particular API. So the first thing to do is to have a URL. So we go to the URLs in the project folder under the URLs. And now from here, as you can see, we had the admin over here, right? So we have the admin, which now we are using here. We are using it here, right? /admin for our application. Now for our API, we need to register that, which now what I've called, you can call it anything, but for me, I'm calling it API version 1. So this is my version 1 of my social media API, right? So that is version 1. You can have a version 2, version 3, version 4 as you continue developing your application, right? So this version 1 will point to URLs of my social API project URLs. So I have social API project URLs, which now these URLs are here. They are under the application folder. Right? So these are the URL, and you need to define them. You need to create a list of the URL patterns. And then this particular URL patterns, you have the one that is at the root of that, and you have the authentication, right? So this API, because the API needs to be protected, there are some resources that require the user to sign in. And of course, also the API, for you as a developer to visualize the API, you need to test it. You need also to have this authentication. So we are pointing to the REST framework URLs. So the REST framework module comes with its own user interface for seeing the endpoints that you're exposing. Right? To visualize that, you need to have an API documentation. So this API documentation, if you're working with front-end developers, you share those API using that particular that particular uh, that particular user interface, right? Which I'm going to show you right now. And then, of course, before you go so far, you need to also to create some views, right? So for you to be able to expose these endpoints, you need to create some views that are going to display the endpoints and what payloads that you need to send. The payload is basically the data that you send from the front end, so that it can be stored in the database and how you need to retrieve that. So you need to expose that using view, because Django uses model view controller. What's that called? A methodology called MVC, or the model view controller, where the model, we have seen the models. Now you need the view part. The view part is now whatever the user sees, and the controller is what connects the two together. So we need to create some views. So you go to the views file here, and we create the view. So we need to have a view for each and every model that we have. So we create that inside the views folder. So we have a profile view, and so we extend. So in this views, we extend what we call the view set, model view set, which now this is a library that comes with the REST framework, right? So we need to import that, of course, import it here, and then we extend the model view set and the query set. So we define the query set. Basically, the query set here is where we are querying everything from the database. So this, the moment you created the models and you ran migrations, you can be able to access the data of that, the data in that particular table using, the profile.objects.all. So now this is going to give you all the profiles, right? And of course, now you also need something called a serializer, right? So the serializer here is basically another class that I've saved here in the serializer folder, which basically, because you don't want to expose everything in a particular, in that particular, maybe in a data set, in that particular individual data, because you don't want to expose everything, you can filter using the serializer. So the serializer here basically tells the view set the fields that we only need to expose. So we only need to expose the ID, the full name, the avatar, the phone number, and all those things. So that now we serialize that, right? Or we'll kind of like filter everything from this particular model. So you need to have this serializer as well, so you can specify that when you're building the views. And now, of course, the permission classes here are basically saying who can access this particular resource, right? So you are restricting it here. So you make sure if you need a person who is signed in to view the profile, they need to be signed in. So you need to make sure that you add the permission that is authenticated. But the other permissions, if you need to expose this to everyone, you can use like anonymous, any anonymous, right? So any person who is accessing that API can be able to see. And of course, there are so many other permissions that you can play around with, right? But for now, we want to make sure that everyone who accesses the profile is someone who is signed in or authenticated. So make sure that that is done. And actually, you can put many permissions, right? So you can have is authenticated and is admin, right? To restrict only for admins. So you can say authenticated and it's only admin. So you can have multiple. That's why this is a list. It is a list. I'm assuming most of you already have some knowledge of Python. And that's something else that we do at Moringa School is when you enroll, before you get to learn this framework, the first thing that you do is we make sure that you first of all understand Python basics. You understand about the Python data types and how you work with those data types and all those things. And then now we get into frameworks. So for this particular session, I'm doing a lot of assumptions in such a way that we have a very small time, a very small time to build something. So I'm skipping a lot, right? So if you're not following closely, you can always check these things up online, or you can sign up a course at Moringa School, and you're going to learn these things into details. So those are the permissions. Of course, now you can do that to all other models. Okay, all other models, and of course, each model has its own serializer, right? So for this particular, I wanted to create a file for each serializer, but I just decided to put everything in one particular file. And you can actually combine this. You can combine a view and a serializer at the same time. So it just depends on how you want to structure your files, right? So this is what is all about. So once you create the serializer, the view and the serializer, now you go back to the URLs and you register. You register those particular, you basically is like pointing, saying that if you see this particular endpoint, load this particular view. So that's what the registration here is doing. So we are registering the routes, the API endpoints basically. So we are saying if you see an endpoint that has profiles, you need to expose this particular view set. Right? So you can see that practically. So we register that, and then we come here and say at the base of the API. So the base here means it's the base of what we have over here, the base of API / v1. So this one points directly to the path that is an empty path. So it's going to point directly to here. And this is where we are including all the routes that we have registered over here. Right, so we register those routes, all of them. And how we can now visualize this practically is if I go now to the browser, and now this time around I type localhost. So localhost and this 127.0.0.1 is basically the same. So this is an IP address, but I'm accessing using a domain here. So /API/v1. So v1 here now gives me the API documentation, or maybe the how a list of the endpoints that I've exposed. Like right now, I've exposed the profile endpoint, the posts, and the comments. Right, and I can be able to see if I wanted to see all the profiles. I can expose this, and I can see. Of course, I need to be authenticated. Remember, we said that if someone is not signed in because of the permission, I'll get this particular error that says authentication credentials were provided. Now, to log into this particular portal for seeing the endpoints, because I've set up this auth, now that gives me this particular part. It points to this now, right? And I can actually log in with the same credentials that I logged in using the admin. And now I'll be able to see, sorry, I think yeah. So now these, just update. Now this one tells me that there are no profiles, and I can actually test it a bit, right? I can test the API from here. But allow me to test this using another tool, right? So we have another tool for testing APIs that is called Postman. I think I've already installed Postman. So we use Postman to test most of our APIs, because the APIs are usually called outside, right? They're called from an outside, from a front end. So because we haven't yet built the front end, we can use the Postman tool, to test that. Just a moment. Right. So yeah. So from here we can type the endpoints and all that. So I'm going to switch to a branch that has more recent code. So I'll switch to a branch that has more recent code. Git branch. So I'll use the last one that I did was maybe let me go to a post with image. So I'll check out post with image. Check out post with image. Oh, I'm supposed to commit my changes. So git status. Because I don't want these changes, so I'll just stash them. So git stash, because I don't really need those changes. So git checkout post with image. So the post with image now gives me a more updated code. So let me just confirm that. So this one has a bit of updates because I have the auth endpoint. So in this particular, okay. So let me just look at what we have exposed from here. So this one must be giving us the most recent. So this one has users. It has exposed also the users. It needs authentication. Let me authenticate here. This is the one. Of course, it's not the one. So admin using JMOS. I must have changed something in this. See, it is going to. So it has thrown me out. Probably now the password for this is the one that is here. The thing about passwords is you get to forget them. Probably it's admin. Let me just put admin. Yeah, admin works. All right, so so going back to this so that I can see the most recent endpoints. I can't wait to start implementing this on the front end as it becomes more interesting. So we have the users right now, authenticate credentials needed, admin. This might not actually work because I've changed the way it's authenticating, so that might actually not work. But let me take you to other things that I've installed into this one. So because the social media application needs us to have a certain kind of authentication, because how the authentication works is you have the one that is tracked using. Okay, so it basically. Oh, sorry. I think I should. So how the authentication works is you have two types of managing the session. When a user logs in, there's the session for the one that you use sessions, but for APIs, mostly you use what we call tokens, right? You use tokens mainly because the reason for that is because the front end runs on a different domain from the backend. And sessions use what we call cookies. I know you guys have heard and have seen cookies around. So you have those two. And the meeting is being recorded. So because cookies depend on the domain, right? So if the domain is different, if I store a cookie in the domain, let's say for example the domain moringa.com, I cannot use the same cookie for frontend.moringa.com. Those are two different domains. And hence to counter that, we use tokens. So tokens are basically user credentials encrypted into a token. So that's the reason why I can't even log into this particular thing, because it needs a token. So to configure that, to be able to work with such, we need to install a bit of more, some other modules that will help us do that. And one of the modules that I'm using is, I don't know if this one has, maybe let me just go to the most recent one so that I can explain this better. Maybe I switch to git checkout develop. So develop has the most recent code. Please commit again. I don't want the changes. I need to stash them. And then I go to, of course, develop. Let's confirm which branch I'm in. Okay, in the develop branch. So you can see now this one has, on the package for managing that comes actually with Django REST. So if I go to the setup applications, you can see there is a this is actually a library within the Django REST. It's called auth token. But the best token that you can use is what we call JWT, right, which I've not even implemented here. So because that one now will carry the user information, we don't have to keep requesting for that. But for this particular one, we are using auth token. And of course, so this auth token, you also need to, down here, to come to the settings, the settings for API, this particular part here, REST framework, we need to specify the count of authentication that we'll be having. So the other one, I had to include the session here so that you can be able to log in. Because now I've included this, because now this portal uses a session. It doesn't use the token itself. What we need for the token is the front end, right? But for this portal, we need to enable sessions. So if I try to log in here now, of course, now with admin, I think let me change this to admin. I will be able now to see that I'm logged in. Hopefully that is the case here. So I'm logged in, and I'm able to see the users. I don't know why. Yeah, like I can see the profiles that have already been created. I have all these profiles, and this basically this is what you share with the front-end developers. If you're working as a team, the front-end developers would want to know which APIs they need to work with. So you expose this to them. You give them this link, and from here now they'll be able to see the endpoints that they need to call to do something to the backend. And they can actually also see the schema, or maybe the structure of the JSON file, how they need to structure the fields they need to use to post, and all those things. So now we can test this with Postman. For example, we can sign up, right? Because we have a sign up. We have registered the route, the endpoint for sign up. So let me take you back there. Remember where we are registering the endpoints here. I've registered 2 endpoints for sign in and sign up, right? Because I wanted this to be handled a bit differently, right? So I created an authentication view set. So if I go to the view set here for that, or maybe let me just go to the model direct. So in the model for, in the view set, sorry, not model. So in the view set here, so this is the authentication view set that I created. And so this view set, what it does is it uses the user view set, the serializer for user view set. And of course, now I'm saying that because this is an action, because what happens is with Django REST, every action is created for you. So the actions here are basically what we call the CRUD operation. So CRUD operation means create, read, edit, delete. Maybe I should have asked anyone, or maybe let me ask, and I want to see if you guys are following or have an idea of what I'm speaking about. So the CRUD, create, read, edit, what does that represent in terms of manipulating your data, your database? When you say CRUD, what does that represent in terms of database operations, like manipulating your data? Does anyone have an idea? Do you have anyone with an idea of what that does, what the CRUD does? Yeah, so I can see Jaconia says create a user. So let me put that let me put that in a more let me know if you guys can see. Create here a Jamboard to whiteboard. Let's go to this. Probably this is going to give you a more clearer picture for what I'm talking about. So whenever you are so CRUD, yeah. So operations refer to the methods that help interact with the data. Yes, precisely. So that's Mongi has actually got what that basically means. So when you're working with a database, you need to add data into it, you need to retrieve, and then you might actually need to update that data, and you might also want to delete. So the CRUD here, so it's written like that. So CRUD like that. So this one is for create, and of course now you have this one to read, and this one is for update. I hope that is corrected. And this is also for delete. So this is what you do to manipulate the data. So this translates to methods. As I talked about MVC. So the model here is the representation of our data. The view here is basically what the users see. And this is where also the endpoints are going to land. But the C here, basically the controller connects those two. It connects the two. So the controller here will connect will connect these two. Okay. So now for the controller here, you need to have some actions. So the create will trigger some actions on this side, on the controller side, right? And the action that gets triggered here is also connected to what we call HTTP. Is something we call HTTP verbs. I know I'm getting too technical, but so there's what we call the HTTP verbs, which are basically post and the posts. There's also what we call get, and there's also what we call patch or put, and there's also what we call delete. So these are basically the way you send request to the HTTP, right? So you either send a request to post, which triggers a create, right? Get, which basically retrieves data, and update, which basically is a patch. So these are where now from the front end, this request is going to be sent using this, which now triggers some actions in the model. So it will trigger some actions there. So these actions are already pre-created. So the moment you create your Django application, for example, if you look at the views that we had created before, these particular views here, Akina user and profiles, we don't have to define because these are already pre-created. But for any other action that is outside from, like signing, for example, we have to create that action for ourselves. So this particular part here is for creating the action for signing in, right? So I had to create the view set here and create an action for signing in, which basically does what? It takes in the username and the password, and of course now authenticates this particular user. And by once the user is authenticated, we create a token, which now says that this particular token means that this user is signed up, and the token will expire at a specified time, right? Because you can specify all those things, like I can, in the settings here, you can specify how old is going to be a session. I haven't set that up, but you can say that the token should expire after a given period of time, right? So that is the whole thing behind now the whole thing behind setting up now the sign up for that action for signing in. And of course, now I have also another action for signing up. So the signing up here, it basically collects the name, the username, the email, the password, of course, the confirm password, and now it creates a user. So this is the create bit that I'm talking about. So it will create this particular user, and of course, after the user is created, we create a profile for that user, right? We also create a profile for this particular user, and then now we respond to the request. We say that the user has been created successfully with a status, created status, right? Because HTTP works with some statuses. These statuses can tell you if a request had errors, or it happened successfully, or there was a failure or something. So you communicate that via the HTTP codes. So that basically what it does is, if I go to Postman right now and I want to sign up using Postman, I would come here and create a post, right? So these are the HTTP verbs I was talking about. So I want to do a post request. Basically, a post is I'm creating something, right? So I'll say the endpoint that I want to hit is API /v1. Remember that part, we set it up here. We set it up in the project URL here. So that is that. And of course, now if you have this other one, I don't know if this is visible. Oh, are you guys seeing my screen? Oh, yeah. How many people are seeing Postman? Are you seeing Postman? Okay, I can see 2 people. The majority of you are seeing Postman. So that is the first part here, API v1, and then now that goes further to auth. So auth now is not set here, but it's set here. So this is the auth part, this part over here. So it's auth sign in, which now points to the action view action sign in. So that is what we are going to call here. So we are calling sign up. Maybe I have a sign up already set up, everything. Yeah. So we have a sign up. And of course, now if we are posting, we need to specify the payload or the body of our post. So we do that because we are going to use HTTP, JSON. We want to use our API is basically, we use JSON to pass data to the front end. So we need to specify the body here in form of JSON, and then we specify each and every field that we need. Remember, what we need here is the name, the full name, the username, the email, the password, and the confirmation password. Those are the things that we need. So we can specify that. So we already have the username here, and we can have the full name here. Just use my son's name. We also need the username we have. We also need the email. You don't have to observe any order here. And we also need to have a confirm password. Full name, username, email, password. Full name, username, email, password. We also need to have a confirm password, which I haven't implemented that. So we are testing the API. So remember, what we are doing is we are testing the API. So the username here is Jesh, the password is Jesh as well, and also we'll use the same password. So we've specified the endpoint that is exposed, the data that we are posting, And yeah, so that's all we need, so we can send. So for us to see what that actually happens, I will run this application differently. So instead of running it from the terminal, I have set up a particular tool in VS Code. You can set up something in VS Code called I don't called the launcher, or you can have a debugger or a launcher. So I have this debugger set up that says that I can use the debugger to run this particular application, where I define the configuration for the application. I say it needs to run this command or this program, manage.py, right? And then run this particular argument. So the same way we are running it here, uh, Python manage.py. So we are basically pointing to that manage.py, and run server here is basically the argument that we are going to run. So we can now use this particular tool here called the debug tool. And when you go to the debug tool, you're going to see, you can actually now see that application registered. So Python Django. So if I run, I click on this, it will basically do the same thing. Model.py content. Okay. So it basically does the same thing. So if you look at the terminal, but now this gives us some some tools, like I can come here and say, create a breakpoint for the views. Let me go to the view. I can say stop over here, right? I can do a breakpoint over there to just see what is happening. So if I send this request, the first thing that is going to land is it will land here. So it means now we are at this point in the code, in the execution of this particular code. So now I can see the request that was done. I can inspect the request. I can see that I have all the data that I need to retrieve. And I can go ahead and see how it has been retrieved one by one. So I can look at the name here, the username, the email, right? I can also check the password. So I can follow the process through. So once I do that, I run that. So I'll check here, I get a response here that says user created successfully. And we can confirm that this user was created through there. We can use the admin here to just confirm if the user is registered, the user that we just created. So admin, I think. So I told you this one is for monitoring these things. So we can come here and see that the user Jesh has been created, and the profile has also been created for Jesh. So you can check here number 4. This is the person that we wanted. So yeah, so that's basically it with all about the API. I don't know if there are any questions, because I want us to now go to the front end. But all this code, I've exposed it in the GitHub repository. If you do it, if you clone it, you'll be able to edit it. If you fork it, because I haven't included you as a developer, but you can fork it. And if you feel there's some changes that we need to improve, you can always send me a pull request. If you do some very important, interesting updates, you can send me a pull request to include your changes in this repository. So is there any questions so far? Because in the next 1 hour or 1.5 hours, I want us to now build the front end. Yeah. So if there's no question, I will now transition to the front end. So we have a fully functional, this particular, it's not perfect, but it's fully functional API. We can send requests to it, we can receive responses, and now we are done with our Django backend. Now we switch to the front end now. So for our front end, what I did is, maybe I don't know if I don't want to start from scratch because it's going to take us quite some time. But what I did here is, if I do ls you can see there's a folder here called frontend. So if I access the frontend folder and do ls, there's another folder here called social, right? The reason why this folder was created is, remember now, our frontend, we are building it using React. So React is a React is a framework, is a JavaScript framework that was developed by Facebook that helps in terms of performance of a front-end application. Performance, there's so much that we talked about React in the first session. If you can access that video, you'll be able to know, but it's a very interesting tool or framework that you can use to create your front-end application. There are different frameworks, JavaScript framework out there like Angular, and of course we have Vue, so many other that have popped up, right? And they have their own advantages and disadvantages, right? So for React, in terms of performance, especially doing something called rendering the DOM object, because that is where its strength lies. It doesn't recreate the entire DOM, but it renders only a bit of a small portion of the DOM that needs to be updated. So it doesn't update everything. You can listen to the video, the one that we had previously, to just understand or get the context of what I'm talking about. You can also look at the React documentation for all those things. But of course, there's a tool called Create React App. So you can run it. So if you wanted to create a front-end application from scratch, you can use npx create React app, and then you give the app name, right? So you can say FB maybe for probably. So this one is going to create for you. It will going to create for the boilerplate of React application, right? So basically a very basic React application. Maybe I can run this. It takes a bit of time, but I can run that in the background, for example, so that I can show you what it's going to build later on. But yeah, so that creates that. Sorry, maybe I should run that with / so that it doesn't interrupt. Yeah, so that one can be running in the backend. Just remove FB and run that again. So this is going to create a basic React application that you are going to build upon, right? Anyway, let me just cancel this and just open what we have. So I'm going to open what I had already started already. So this one is, I created it that way. So we'll open it. And so that one is going to create a basic structure of your application, which has all the packages, because when you're working with Node.js has also packages that you work with, Node packages, and React is actually a Node package that comes, and of course, each and every package has its own dependencies, right? So the dependencies are basically other package that a package depends on, right? I hope that makes sense. So once we create that, it creates this particular basic application, which basically has the public file, the node modules. So this is where all the packages, third-party packages, are stored, and of course the public folder, which basically has the index.html file, which basically this index.html file is like the entry file. The entry file to a React application. So because it has this particular, we talked about HTML elements before. You can also look at the video that we for the previous session. So it has these structured HTML that has all these things. But the interesting bit is it's this part here that has the this particular element, the root, because now all our React application is going to be rendered inside of this particular DOM element, right? So that becomes like the entry file for the HTML. And of course, it also creates this source file, a source directory, and it has this index file. So the index file here, actually the index file is now what now loads or renders our application, our React application. So this index file has, of course, it loads the CSS. CSS is basically how the application looks and feels. And of course, now there's the web vitals basically collects the vitals of the application to know how it's performing. And of course, now it has this particular library, the React library, that has all the libraries that we need to create the React application. And it has also this React DOM. So the React DOM here is what now enables us to render partial parts of the DOM. So it helps us to render the partial parts of the DOM. As you can see here, the first thing that it does is it creates the root, where now the root now is the DOM element that we saw in the HTML file. So we are getting that by ID, right? So that means that all the application that you're going to build is going to be rendered in this particular DOM element. So we create it as the root, and of course now we render the application. So the application that we are rendering is this React component. So React uses something, uses a particular type of syntax that is called JSX. So JSX is basically JavaScript XML, right? So XML is a traditional way of writing, HTML. I mean, markup language. And this, whatever you're seeing here, the HTML, the markup language that we are using here, it uses XML markup language. You can check that up in the online. So this is how you structure that. So JSX is a mixture of both. It's basically HTML inside JavaScript, right? It's HTML inside JavaScript. So that's what it uses. It's called JSX. So you might see some tags like this one that looks like HTML, but it's actually JSX. And of course, now React uses what we call components to facilitate reusability of code. As a developer, you need to be able to, as a developer, you need to write dry code. Speaking of dry code, just give me 1 second. I take a cup of water, or maybe we can take like a 5-minute break. So we can start over at 7:10. So just let's have a 5 minutes break. So done. The video is going to be shared. Yeah. So let's take a 5 minutes break and then we continue after that. All right, mic check. Can you guys hear me? All right, welcome back from the break. So yeah, we left off by where I was saying that as a developer, you need to write dry code. Dry code meaning do not repeat yourself. So a React comes with this way of writing code that's called creating components. So every component is reusable. You can use it everywhere. So as you can see, the application that we are rendering in the root here is basically a component. So it does that in two ways. You can create class component or you can use functional component. So the reason why I think initially during the first releases of React, you could only create, if you are to work with component, and there's something called a state. State is basically is data, is actually the state of the data that you are working with, right? The state of that particular data, because you work with data. So the only way you could work with state or manage state, the only way you could do that is using the class components. Right? There was no way of creating that using functions. So if you needed your application to be dynamic, you had to create a component using classes. But now the latest version of React implements what we call hooks. So hooks, they help you now manage state even when you create your component using functions. So to see what a component is, we can look at this app component, which is basically a file, which is basically a component that has been created in this particular file called app, right? So the app file here, if I were to access this app file, which is this file over here, so if I were to open it, you would see that it's a function, right? It's actually a function that's called app. So when you're creating this component, you need to make sure that you start with a capital letter, right? So the components have to be created using a title case. So you need to start with an uppercase and whatever else now you want to put after that. So for this particular one is app. And of course, for the component to be complete, it needs to return one JSX syntax. So what do I mean by that? You need to be able to return one JSX syntax or maybe one JSX element. So you can't return multiple elements. So for this, we only have this particular component, which is written in JSX syntax, which is now the browser here. So you need to return only one, right, element. If you want to return multiple JSX elements, you need to use something called fragments, right? So fragment is basically that kind of a code, that kind of a tag that I have over here. So these are a JSX fragment. Let me cut this. Now this one, if you start it like this, now you can put multiple element over here. Like I can have a header. So this one looks like HTML, but it's actually not HTML. It's what we call JSX. So you can have the header here and the main, and the main there, right? Now, if you use the fragments, you can be able to return multiple elements. The reason why you use fragment here is because if I run this application, for example, let me save. And how we run this is basically using something called npm. npm is a node package manager, and I can say npm start. Right, so npm start, what it does is it will go into the package.json file and search for the script, the start script, which is this script over here. So the script here, what it does is says React a script start. Okay, so when I say npm start, it triggers this. So npm start, you can see it has triggered that. So I want to explain what the fragments does. So when I run this and I preview this in the browser, so basically there's a whole process. There's a whole process that happens behind the scene when you run that. It has to do quite some bit. It has to make sure that it runs this application using some other libraries, and some of the libraries that React is using are here, right? So we have the React itself. Actually, from here we have the React itself, the React DOM, and so it uses something called, if you look at the developer, the developer dependencies. I don't know if it is they're here. They're not listed here, but you can see other packages like Webpack for basically compiling the code, because React code has to be compiled so that it can be seen on the browser, right? Remember, React is written in Node, and Node is a backend programming language. So it needs to be compiled to be converted into JavaScript and HTML. Because remember, what we are writing is basically we are writing code in form of Node.js and JSX. JSX, remember, it's not HTML. So that JSX has to be compiled to HTML so that it can be rendered on the browser. So what the work of Webpack, that is the work of Webpack. It does that in the background. That's why you have to see compiling happening, right? So the compilation has to be done, and then now you can now be able to see something on the browser. So this is what we typed. If I go to the inspect these, you'll be able to see that on the DOM. Let me just try to zoom in a bit here. Plus, 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 plus. So if you can see, the root element is here, and the header has been rendered, and the main. So you can see they have been rendered as the children of the root element, right? So instead of using, because the other way that before the fragment you'd have just written a div like this instead. You'd have done a div like that, but now this one creates an extra. It creates an extra element that you don't necessarily need. So if you look at the DOM here, it has this div here, which we don't really need it, right? So instead of having, and remember, every element here is what React tries to improve in terms of performance. The more elements you have, the bigger the DOM object, right? So to reduce the size of the DOM object, you need to make sure that you use very little elements in the browser. So instead of having an extra div here that we are not actually really using, we need to use now the fragments, okay? Right, so all you need to remember is this particular, when you create a component, it has to be like a function, and it has to return one JSX element. So our JSX element that we are returning here for our application is basically this element we are calling the browser router, which I'm going to talk about next. So once this is done, we export it. So remember, you can create these JavaScript modules as well, and you can we talked about reusability, so you can create these components and reuse them. So once I create a component in this particular file, for me to reuse it or to expose it to other modules, I need to export it, right? So there are two types of exports. You can have a default export, and you can have something else called an unnamed export. For example, I can create a function here, and this function I say is for, maybe let me just say calculate. A function like that, calculate, and maybe probably it does some calculations. So I'm just going to do console log do calc. So if I wanted to expose this function as well to the outside modules, I can now do export, but this time round I export without the default export like that. Just a moment. Yeah, so let me export it from up here. Sorry. Export. So when I export it here, function that, or the other way I could have done this is by defining a variable. So I could have said export constant calculate, and now assign this maybe to an arrow function like that, which can still this is just the same as what you're doing over here, right? You know, or on a high level, it's basically just the same. So this is what we call like a named export. It's not a default export, and that basically now translates on how you reuse this. So if I go back to the index here, you can see how this has been imported. Application with a default export, you can import it as anything. I can say here I can import this as a social media media front end app. I can import it like that because it's not a named export, it's a default export, and I can use it like that, and this is going to work. So you need to make sure that you export your component as default. You need to export them as default export. For the other one, which is a named export, you need to import it differently. You need to import it like this. So from the same place, from the app, we need to import. So you need to specify what you're importing inside these curly braces. So I can say I want to import calculate for some reasons that I want. So for the named export, you need to import them like this. For the default export, you don't need the curly braces, and you can name them the way you want, but this is not advisable. So it's better to just use the same name, right, as the component name. So it's not advisable unless if it's necessary. Unless if it's necessary, you can rename that default export to whatever else you want to call it. But do that only when it's necessary. And of course, now the named exports, imports, you import them like this. So that is all about the component, but still that is just the shallow part of the component. So we are able now to create our application this side. So the application here, I'm going to remove this because we don't need it. So the application here, remember now it's a web application, and for us to navigate a web application, we need to have routes, or what you call, however you want to call them, they're called routes. Routes is basically the way, it's almost the same as endpoints, but these are called front-end routing. You need to have front-end routing, which now are going to navigate, you're going to navigate between one view to the next, or maybe one page to the next. So with React, you can build what we call a single page application. A single page application is whereby you create an application that doesn't reload, or doesn't, it will show you that it has changed to one page to the next, but it does not reload the entire page. It doesn't refresh the entire page. So that's a single page. Basically, everything is on a single page, or even though it's built using different components, but it's a single page application. Basically, you don't navigate to another page, a different page out there, or the page doesn't refresh, but you're still on the same page, but things have changed, right? The UI has changed. So to help us do that, we use a component, or a library, or maybe a Node.js package called React Router. So we need to install React Router. And basically how you install those packages, other packages that you want to use, remember, you are writing dry code, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. We can easily create our own routing, way of routing, but because we don't have the time to do that, and there's someone else who has done it better, we can reuse their code. So we can install, you can do npm install React Router DOM. So this is a package, a node package that helps us to navigate through our application. So you need to install it, and you need to make sure that you list this particular package in the package.json file. So you need to make sure that you save it. So with this particular flag, the save will make sure that it is going to list it as part of the dependencies. Right? So we are saying that our application will depend on React Router DOM. So it needs to be listed here. Yeah, here it is. And who can tell us why do we need to list these dependencies? Why do you think it's important to have them listed in the package.json file? Who has an idea? Anyone? Yes, Paul, thank you.
So that they can be available locally. Maybe can say locally.
Yes, so yeah, that's one of the reason why they need to be listed. That's one of the reason why. Who can tell us another reason, or can you think of another reason why? There's someone else who has raised their hand. Just look at that is Rooney.
They are the dependencies that are managing the front end, so they should be when you save it, it will be it will be able to manage your app when it's running.
Yes, that's also another reason. But the one, the most, I'm not saying, so you guys have actually, you have an idea, everything that you've told me is true. But the other reason that you need also to list it here is because if I go right now to the GitHub repository for this particular project, you will see, probably let me go to the develop branch. You will see inside, maybe not, but this is the develop branch. I hope it switches fast. Please fast. So as it's loading, you'll see that in that particular repository, you are not going to see the node modules, because the node modules are all the packages that I need for this application. They are here, and there are so many. There are usually very many. And so these particular packages, the files for these packages are not usually shipped. They don't get, when you git push them to the repository, they don't go. They don't go with that, right? Because it's going to be a very big folder when you upload it to the repository. And so when the person you're collaborating with, when they pull this project, it doesn't come with this, right? And of course, probably they don't know which packages you already have. So they'll use the dependency here. So they'll come here and say, after they have cloned, or after they have cloned your application or forked it, they can do npm install. So this particular command checks the dependency. This npm install, it will open the package.json file, checks the dependency, and it will install all those dependencies. Now, this person doesn't have to ask you, right? Which dependency should I use? And even you yourself, you might not keep track of all the dependencies that you have. So this helps you manage these dependencies, right? And for also your application to run smoothly depends on this. So that is a fourth reason, adding to what you've given me. And a fifth reason is when deploying this application, the server also does it. The only way the server will know the dependencies, because sometimes the server will build your application first before it gets used. So the server also will use this particular file to know the dependencies that will help that application run smoothly without bugs. Right. So those are like 5 reasons. Right. So it's very important that when you're installing a package, when you're doing npm install, and then you can write a short form of install as but let me just write it in full. Install React router DOM. It's very important you say that should be saved in the dependency list. Okay, so never forget to add the save here. So we install our React router here. So the React router now will help us be able to create routes. And once you create the React router DOM, it will come with other, other libraries within it. And some of the libraries are in form of components. So we have the base component here, which is the browser router. So it's very interesting because once you learn React, you can code anywhere. Basically, once you learn React, you can be able to create even mobile application. Right? You will be able now to create mobile apps using something called React Native, right? So React Native, when you're coding React Native, which is for building a native application built in React. I don't know, Paul. Paul, do you have a question or you want to answer? I've seen Paul. Your hand is up. Paul Kibevi. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem. So yeah, so once you learn React, you can be able to create even native application for mobile that will run on Android phones or even iOS phones. But you have to learn something called React Native. So to differentiate the kind of routes that we are building, we use the browser router. Otherwise, if we are creating a React Native application, we would have used native, is it native or something? I don't know. Native. I'm not quite sure about that, but you use something different here to tell the device that is going to run the application that these routes are for mobile. Okay, but for browser we use the browser router, and then of course we have the other component that now defines the routes. The routes here we say so we have this parent component for routes that basically says these are the routes that we are going to use, and we have the route component here. So the route component has a path. So the path here is basically the endpoint that we'll be using, or the path that we'll use. So this one, first of all, is I will explain why I have this as the parent, and then of course we have other routes in here that says for sign up, here's the sign up, the path for sign up, the path for sign in, the path for the profile. And of course, now these routes point to other components. So we can see for the home component, we need to create a component for home. So I created a component for home under pages. So when you're structuring your you can have a folder for pages which basically represent the views or the different pages that you have. Like for example, I have the component for the home page, a component for the profile page, the sign-in page, and the sign-up page. So we have those. So these routes point to components that I've created. Like for example, this one is the home component. It basically has, this particular function that just says home. For profile, it has even the same component that says just profile. Remember to always export. If you don't export it here, you will not be able to import it in your application. You will not be able to import it. So we have imported that. And of course, now we are mapping the routes to the components. Okay, so going back to this one, the parent. So basically, an application needs to have a layout which now keeps everything consistent. There are those parts of an application that usually don't change. The first part, like if I access an application here, if I go to, like, let's say even GitHub, this particular part over here never changes. Like the top part over here, it will never change. Even this one will probably not change even if I go to another repository. For example, if I open another repository, let me go to the home and I open up a different repository, like let's say, I don't know, browsing takes a bit of time. So if I go to repositories, as you can see, this part is not really that much changing. Stays consistent. So that is the part of the application that we put in the layout, right? The part that usually, even the footer, sometimes you'll see this bottom part, but the part at the bottom here doesn't really change that much. It remains consistent in all the pages, right? So that is what we define under the layout. component. So the layout component is basically in the components up here. So if you open this, you'll see it has quite some things, right? So I'm going to collapse this just to explain the major parts. So it's a component I'm exporting, and then it has this particular part over here. It's called the outlet. So inside the outlet is the root, is where all the views are going to be loaded. Every time I access a particular, if I access the home page, it's going to be loaded in the outlet. If I switch to the profile, it is going to render the profile inside the outlet. So you are not going to see the pages changing, but basically what changes is the content of the outlet. And of course, now whatever loads in the outlet is what you point to here in the root. Okay. Whatever you point in the root, that's what's going to be loaded. So that becomes our layout, and that is our routing, how we are building the routes. So the other thing is the theme, the how because again, in the spirit of being able not to reinvent the wheel, if we were to build this application from scratch, I would create a layout using probably Figma, go there, design a very good looking application, make sure that the user experience is working fantastic. And actually I've done something close to that. So let me go to the Figma. As I told you, a full stack developer, you need to have a knowledge of everything. You also need to know how probably Figma works. So I'll open Figma here. Of course, if you're working as a team, there could be someone doing this for you. But if you're building a solo application and you want to follow each and every process, you need to be able to have a knowledge of Figma. I think, maybe I think this other one is the one that has the design that I came up with. I hope it's going to open as fast as I want it to. Yeah, so you would, if you were to create it from scratch, you can have a Figma design and then translate that design using CSS. Right? You need also to go and create. So, like for example, this is the design I have. I need to go and convert that design into CSS. So create, the colors, everything that I need to style that particular user interface, and all those things, and then of course now creating the components that reflects. So this one is quite simple. So what I have here is basically a sign up page, edit profile page, search, where we're going to search for people you want to follow, and of course now here is going to have the posts are going to be here. I didn't get the time to complete everything, but probably you create this and then convert this to HTML and CSS, or maybe JSX and CSS. Or you can use such wonderful tools that Figma does. If you want to convert this directly into a React component, there's a way Figma does that for you through some plugins that you need to install, which I don't have at the moment. So what I opt into is using other framework, other CSS frameworks that are out there. There's a framework called Material React. There's another one called Bootstrap. So if you want to fast track, if you want to build these things quicker, you can decide not to build everything from scratch, but to use some of those frameworks. So what I've used here is material design. So I need to install material design. So if you look at the packages dependency here, you'll see that I have this package called MUI material or material UI. It has also some icons that I can also use called material UI icons. So this is what I'm going to use to just build, to fast track everything, to not go and create CSSs and all that time. We don't have that time right now. But for a more customized application, you can opt in to go that direction. But also this material UI, maybe React material, you can see all the documentation that you need from here to set it up and to use it, right? So you can look at the documentation. It has everything that you need, the docs. It has all the components that you might want to use for your application. As you can see, they are already pre-built. So you can actually do a copy paste of some of these if you want to fast track things. So if you go here, you'll see you have all these components that you can have, right? The buttons, the checkboxes, and all that. They are built in JSX, so you can actually use that. And you can also go ahead and customize in terms of colors, because it has its own default color. You can customize and theme it to whatever color that you want to use, or to brand your application, right? So you can use these theming ideas and everything. So this is what you're going to leverage on for now, right? You are not going to build stuff from scratch, but you can use them. But that doesn't mean that everything is readily available, because you need also to piece the things together. Like for example, for our layout, if I go back to the layout here, the part that I said doesn't really change, which is now the top part over there. I have these particular components that I have. So I start with a container. A container is basically what holds everything together, right? The outer part, and then the top part, which is basically the header part. I have this layout component is called a stack, and a stack will basically align everything that I put inside of it into a row. So I'll put everything in form of a row, and I also have now my logo. So I can have my logo here, or I can put the name of my application over here. Okay. And after that, I can have a navigation. So this is the navigation that I want to have. So the navigation that I want to have is another stack here, but of course I can use HTML elements for navigation. And of course now here, what I'm saying is I'll have these three buttons. I'll have a home that I can navigate to home, and I'll have a sign in and a sign up, right? So we can see how this now works. So let me undo some changes. I don't know what I changed. What did I change? So let me just save. So that now gives us something that looks like, cancel this. Yeah. So that will give us this. It's a very simple application. So it gives us, that is the social media, and these are the links to navigate, the sign in, sign up profile. So we have that, and I can now navigate. So if I click sign in, it loads for me the sign in page. Right? So if you can see that the sign in page, I can go here to the sign up page. And of course, if I type here profile, I'll be able to see now the profile page, which it doesn't have anything, but we are going to put some stuff here. Right? So we have that. So the navigation is working. Our components are loading as we want them to load. So that is how you set up routes. That's how you set up routes. All right, let's go to the other part, which now is the part where we integrate what we built, the backend API, the API that we built. And how do we wire that to the front end? We'll start by signing up, because when someone now comes to this site, they need to be signed up to be able to start posting stuff. Right, so we'll start with the sign up. So if I go to the sign up here, under the pages, the sign up page has quite some stuff here you can look at. So the kawaida component, so we've created a component here, sign up, and remember it needs to return one JSX element. So that is what we have here, the stack. And of course, now I have the card. So I'm just basically reusing the material components. So I have a card. So the card here is what we have that has that white background. That's the card. And of course, now we have the sign up, which now this is the sign up, whatever we have over here. And now the fields. If you can remember, our backend required a full name, a username, an email, a password, and a confirmed password. So we need to collect this information via this. So we are using, again, material components. So we have this form group that basically we can put in. It's just basically grouping the elements. Then we can have now the text area that has the name. We have the text area for username, of course, this one for email and for password. So remember the type here. So whatever carrying is what you need to represent, like type in here, type password here to encrypt the password. Basically to just hide the password. It's not encrypting, but basically hiding the password. And of course, now we have the sign up button over here. So in this particular page, it has a form. As you can see, I like using forms. So when there's something else called now events that you handle with. So in React, you can have things, actions that are triggered clicks or a form, or when a user scrolls, when a user touches a screen. So those actions that a user does to the device can be tied to what we call events. So it can trigger events, and the events are basically functions. So we have an event that is tied to the form. It's called an onSubmit event. So we are saying when the user submits this particular form, we should call this particular function, right? So this function is defined over here. So this function, what it does is it will call for us the API, right? So it will call the APIs for us. So that is the function, okay? So that's the function that's going to be triggered. But before that, I mentioned something to do with state management, which I'm going to talk about maybe in a bit. But just know here that we are submitting a form, and when we do submit, we submit that to the submit. It calls this particular function. So this function, the first thing that it does, it will prevent default. And default here is basically we are telling this, do not submit this do not handle this by submitting it to another page, but basically handle everything using JavaScript. So all this is JavaScript code. So we are telling, when you say prevent default, we are saying don't do the default way of submitting to another page, but handle everything within this particular JavaScript, the code below, okay? And then of course now here we are tying the form. So the event.target, the target here is the element, the JSX element that has been that this particular function or the callback is tied to, right? So if in other words, event.target is actually the form that has the event, the submit event. So that's what we are saving here as a file. And then we are using this particular API called the form data that basically now formats this data into data that we can submit over HTTP, right? Data that we can send over the internet. So it is going to basically format it here, okay? But we are sending data in form of JSON. So if we look at our API here, if we look at the API, the data that we are sending is in form of this way, a JSON object. This is what we refer to as a JSON object. It's basically an object that has a curly braces and it has these attributes that have a key value pair. So the key value pair here is basically the ID, full name. So this is the key, and the value is whatever you have on this side, the key and the value that you have on this side. So we need to format that because we need to send it as JSON. So we format it here as an object. So this particular code block that is what it does. It creates an object that has a key value pair. So the V here is basically the value, and the K here is the V. So remember, we are tying that to a form here. So basically what we are saying is the form has these particular elements, the text fields and all these things. So we are basically saying look for any element that a user can enter data into and pick its name. So this is the name. Pick its name and use the name as the key, right? So use the name as the key. So use the name as the key here, and use the value that the user enters, because the user is going to enter a value here. Use that value as the value. So that's basically what happens over here. So the key here is actually the name of this particular field. So if I go back to the UI, that field is this. So this field has a name, which is now full name. Okay. And the value is the data that I type. So if I type here, like that, so this is going to be the value that is going to be picked. The moment I click on the submit button over here, this particular action is going to pick all the fields and the values and assign that to form data. And because we want to format it as a JSON object, we go ahead and loop. So this for each, the for each here is a JavaScript way of iterating into the fields. So the for each here will iterate through all the fields that it has found, and then it's going to pick the key. So this is a function. It's called an arrow function. This you are seeing over here. So this arrow function says when you are iterating, I want you to pick the value and the key of that element, and then format it this way, right? So we are putting that form, and we are using the corner brackets, which is equals to value. So all this, once you sign up with a course at Moringa School, we get also to introduce you to JavaScript and how the basics of JavaScript, how JavaScript works. So you might not be able to explain everything that is happening here, but of course you can actually, so we take actually like 6 months, no, not 6 months, but 3 weeks or 5 weeks of explaining what JavaScript does, the inner works of JavaScript, how it works, how to use the iterator methods, the data types of JavaScript and all those things. So we can get into details when we have time. But for now, I'm just going to skim through, okay? Right, so that is the first part here, formatting that into an object. And now, of course, this other part over here. So this is the part where this particular line number 28, this is the part where now we talk to the API. This is how we communicate to the with the API, the backend that we built. But there's something very interesting over here that's called API client. So for you to be able to talk to the backend, you need to have a client, because the relationship between the front end and the backend is a relationship that we call a client server model. And for the client and the server to communicate, they need to the client has to send a request. And of course, now the server has to respond, right? So the client has to send a request, and the request that we are sending here is a post. Remember, it's a post. We want to create something. So it's a post request that we are sending to the server. And of course, the server, we have to wait. This particular function here, await, is what we call asynchronous programming. That's why this function is defined as asynchronous. Asynchronous means that we can do other things while we are requesting data from the server. So we need to send this request to the server and wait for the response. So the response is what is going to be assigned to this particular variable. So we need to have a client. So this particular client, we need to bring in another library or another module that will help us to build a client, HTTP client. And the module I'm using here is called Axios. So you can look at it here, it's Axios. So you can as well install this using the npm packages, package manager. So you can do npm install Axios. So it's going to have this Axios here, and it's going to install that package. And of course, now you can now go ahead and create a client. So I'm going to create a client using the using a hook, right? So I'll create a React hook. We talked about hooks. React comes with its own inbuilt hooks that I'm not able to talk about here. Like one of them is the use use state, which we'll look at it. There's other ones that we call use effect and all and others like that. But you can also have your own custom hooks. So for me to create a client, I'll create my own custom hook. And this is the custom hook. So whenever you're creating a hook, you need to use the use API. Okay. So the hook is basically another function. Right? So this is a function that I'm exporting here. And I'm using now Axios to create my client. So I'm saying axios.create to create my API client. And I am also specifying the base URL. So the base URL here, remember what the base URL is actually now the base URL of our API, which at this point I'm saving it inside something we call environment variables. So you need to there's some sensitive information, some sensitive data, or some data that you need to obscure from the code. You save them to API to environment variables. So the environment variable I'm using here is called a React App API base. So you define your environment variables inside the .env file. So if you look at this now, it is the URL to our API. So which was localhost at port 80. And of course, now we had the API v1, right? So that becomes the base of our client, of the client, okay? So there's other things that I'll explain later down here that we do, okay? So, but for now, this is a client that we are using. And of course, now this client, we are exporting it. We are returning it, okay? So we are returning that client, and that is what we are using for sign up. So if I go to the sign up page, as you can see, I'm importing it. I am importing, I'm importing the use API, right? So, and then instantiating it over here, or initializes it over here. So it gives me the API client. And now using Axios now, so Axios now gives us these libraries that we can use, like the post. So we only need to specify the endpoint to what we are posting to. So remember this now, endpoint is what points to our sign up action, right? It points to our sign up action. So that is what we have over here. And now the second parameter, or the second argument that we pass here is the data that we are sending. So this is the data that we are sending, the one that we formatted over here. So that's what we are sending. And then after all that, if the user is signed up successfully, now we are checking that with the if statement. Of course, now we redirect the person to sign in. Okay, so we use navigate to sign in, right? So let's see that in action. So put the username and the email. Actually, we have a user called Jesh, so we can use that, and we can have a password which is testing for now. right. So if we submit, let's say we have a breakpoint in our endpoints again, so we can put a breakpoint here in our backend to just see if this happens. So the other thing that you need to know about the browser, it has these developer tools that you can use regularly, and the most important one here is the network. And of course the console log. There are so many, they are all important, but the one that you want to have an eye on is this one, the network endpoints, right? At the network tab. So this one now tells us, gives us a high overview of what the communication between the client and the server. Right? So you can see how the requests are being sent. So I'm going to filter. I'm going to filter. I'm going to filter it a bit. But anyway, let me just send this. So if I do a post, I can see now the post has been done. So I can click here and I can be able to see that this is what we've posted. I can be able to see to preview the payload that I'm sending. But of course, I'll need to, first of all, it needs to be complete for me to see the payload. So again, the breakpoint is here. So the data has finally arrived. So we can actually see what we've posted. We have Maggie, all those things. So yeah, so we can of course now do that. We can preview. Sorry about that. My internet just dropped. Yeah, but also it's about time. I think we are just 4 minutes past the allocated time, but we can just extend it a bit just to see. And by the way, guys, you can always stop me at any point to ask a question. If you have something that you need to ask, You can pause me at any particular point and ask. So I don't know where I dropped off at. Can someone remind me what I was talking about before I dropped? Mic check. Can you guys hear me? Just react with the thumbs up if you can hear me. David says post. Okay. So in the chat, if you want us to continue for the next 30 minutes, just do a +1 in the chat. If you want us to continue, of course, we might not have a chance to do part 3. That's why I want us to see if we can extend and finish everything in this particular session. So if you don't want us to continue, just do a -1. If you want us to continue, you can do a +1, so that I can know how many people are up to. I can see quite a good number of you are saying we continue. And then how can we access the previous recording? The previous recording, I'll talk to Biko because we did that using Zoom. So I believe it was recorded. So you can, I think he's going to send that over via email. But for this, even for this recording, we are going to share. Probably we are going to share that using the drive, Google Drive. So we will send that as well. Yeah. So we've seen how the post has happened. So if you look at this, we'll be able to see. So you can use the network tab here to monitor how you are doing requests, and also to debug if there's an issue. If there's an issue in the code, right? So this one is the request that we did here, the post. So the first one here is whatever we accessed. So if we click here, sign up, you might not see that happening, but the post that we did is this one. So you can be able to see the payload that we sent. This is the information the user entered. So the password here, you'll not, it's not encrypted. It is just raw like this. But as long as your site is under HTTPS, so if you are under HTTPS, so if your site, you're navigating your site using HTTPS, like for example, the meat that you are using is under HTTPS, which you're supposed to secure your site under HTTPS. Basically, anything that leaves the user's machine, and what I refer to when I say anything that leaves the user's machine, like this machine is that for a user, is this data here, the payload. At the moment it leaves this machine to go to the router, the physical router in your house, the Wi-Fi router, it's going to be encrypted using the SSL certificates. So there's a particular certificate that you need to have. It's called SSL certificate. It does encrypt. It encrypts the data, and that decryption certificate or the decryption key usually is on the server side. It's on the server. So you need also to make sure that the API, the base URL, the one that is on the environment variable, this one, you need to make sure that it is also in HTTPS, right? For me, because this is the developer, everything is in my machine, it's on HTTP. But for production, whatever you write code that you deploy to the public, you make sure that the API base URL is actually HTTPS. So that will ensure that anything that leaves the user computer is encrypted using the SSL certificate. And the moment it hits the server on this other side, it reaches to the server is going to use the same certificate or the secret, the private certificate to decrypt that data. So you don't have to worry about what you see over here, that the password is raw. No one, as long as it's under HTTPS, no one can know the user's password. So that is very important. Yes, George?
I have a question.
Yes.
What if we are using the JWT?
JWT, remember we are doing the sign up here. We haven't gotten to the token bit, but
Okay.
the same applies. The same applies. Even the tokens are, it's encrypted because apart from just the payload, there's other information that we send to the server that is usually in the header part, right? That I'm going to explain right now. So the other information like the method that we are using, which is actually the post. Of course, we have other things like we are telling access control. By the way, I need to talk about this. Not all front-end applications have access to the backend. Not all. Not all have access to the backend. The front end needs to be allowed. The JavaScript that is running in the front end or in the client side has to be allowed. For example, there's this thing that we know, there is this thing that we call access control. Okay, so the access control here basically says, does this site, is it allowed to access this particular API, right? Because not all of them have access to this. So in the backend, like our backend application, we need to go here and install a package, a Python package that is called, we need to install a Python package that is called, let me look at that in the pipe file. We need to have this called a Django cause headers, okay? This particular package will help us to control which application, which front-end application can access to our API. So we are not just giving this to just anyone out there, unless if it's a public API, because there are public APIs that, like the weather API is public. Probably a country might want to open up data for the citizen to the public, probably for some reason or whatever. A public API, that one can be open. But a private API like the one that we are building, we just don't expose it to anyone. So we need to control that using the cause. So we need to download this, and also in the settings here, we need to list which we can only accept requests that are coming from this particular origin, right? So in the event that I remove this, like that, if I remove that, right, I remove that origin there, and I try to post again. I try to post, let me see if it has built. So if I try to do another post over here, for example, I say, hmm, so you can look at the console here. If I submit this, I will, actually the request is reaching here, so let me see if I need to rerun. Yeah, so you'll get this error. Right, so you'll have this error that says access to XML HTTP request at that is blocked, right? So those are the other information that this particular client will send. It also sends the origin, right? So it tells the server this request originates from this particular domain or this particular IP address or whatever. So as long as it's not allowed by the backend, it will not go through. You are going to get errors. So you need to have that listed. You need to have that listed here under allow cause origin. Other things that we can also allow is you need to make sure that you allow credentials. So credential is whereby, some like what you're talking about, the JWT tokens and all that, they are part of the authenticating a user. So you need to allow credentials also to be sent. You can also restrict which methods can be sent from a particular origin. You can say the front end can only do posts, or it can only do gets, but it cannot post. It cannot create, but it can read information from the server. So you can control all that using the allow origins. Okay, so all that can be controlled there. So that is very important when you're building APIs. When you're building APIs, so that is critical. So you can all that information is sent via the network. So that the network tells that. So we have signed up a user. So how now then do we sign in this particular user? So I'll go to the sign in page. I'll explain probably the same thing that I did for the sign up is the same thing that we have. Is the same thing that we have also for the signing. Right? So if we go to the signing page, sorry. So the same thing we have for the signing page is the component that we need. It also has a function that is tied to the submit event, which is the sign-in. The same thing that we did there has happened. But there's something else that we are adding over here. Okay, so we are adding, so the sign-in responds with some important data that we need to work with. So once the user signs in, so if I go to the backend here and I go to the sign-in action, after the user has been authenticated, we are generating a token, right? So this token here is not a JWT token like the one that I forgot who asked the question. It's not the same as what we are using over here, but this is a tokenized way, a Django tokenizing authentication tokenizing way, or whatever. So we are generating this token, and this token is what we are using to track this particular user. So we need to make sure that because we are not using sessions, I talked about sessions earlier, we are using tokens. So we need to make sure that this token is saved in the user side. Right? So that it gets generated and then we send it. So we are sending it here as the response. Okay. So once we send it, it's going to be received by our client in the data. So we need to save it somewhere. And where we are saving it is, again, the browser has these particular tools that we can leverage on. Like if I go to the application here, the application tab, I can see the kind of browser APIs that I can use for storage. So I have these types of storage that I have. I have a local storage here. I have a session storage. And I also have indexed DB. And of course, if I want to see the cookies, of course, I can see all the cookies that are being sent, but we are not using cookies for this. We are not tracking people using cookies, but rather what we want here for the local storage here, this one is going to store the data permanently unless the user clears it. But then for the session storage is basically stores data for that particular session. In a way that when I close this particular tab, when I close it, the data that is saved in the session storage will be deleted or will disappear. But if you put data in the local storage, it's going to be persistent for as long as the user has not cleared it. Okay. And of course, there are other that you can use, like IndexedDB, and all these things actually. But for now, we are just going to leverage on the index or the session storage. So we are saving our token in the session storage, mainly because user signs out. When the user signs out, when the user signs out, closes the tab, that session gets just basically expires. So we are using this session storage.set item. We are saving the token there. Okay. So we save the token there so that we can be able now to track this user. We can keep tracking the user as long as the user is using the application. We are able to track them. We are able to know who is, the backend is able to know who is. So how does that happen? So the first thing is signing, right? So we sign this user in. So we created one. So we created user McGee. I don't know why my browser is hanging. So I'm going to sign in again. I'll go to the network tab to just monitor how this request is being sent. I'm going to clear that. Click the sign in. So as you can see, the sign in sent the payload for the username and the password. And now the response that we got is the token. Right? So this is the token that we have. So this is our token. So this token, this particular bit that we did here, saves that token in the session storage. So if you look at the session storage now, it has a token. Right? So this token is saved here. Right? So we need to find a way of saving it so that the browser can keep a memory of that. So then how do we, now the other thing is now doing the post. So for us to be able to know who is doing this particular post, we need to accompany every post request. And the post here is, for example, I come here and create a component for posting. So I'll quickly create a component here for posting. Yeah, let's try to create a component for posting. So for example, I create component for posting. So I'll use, I need to have probably, let me use typography. I need these two things to complete so that I can go faster. So typography I want to use here is a variant of H3, or let's say H4, and posts something. And so in my post, so I'm going to put a divider here, and then I want to have a form for doing my post. And in this particular form, I'll put an element here, or I'll just use a form group. And then I'll use a text area. So I'll use, let's say I use text field, which is multiple. I don't know. Maybe let me confirm that from the documentation. So you can always leverage on the documentation here for these components. I'll go quickly to an input field that is a text area. Let me use this text field. Just want to look at the syntax for this. I want one that has a multiple line. So this is the one that I want, this kind. So I'll just open here to see the code. So I just need to write to include multiple attributes. So I can go ahead. I think I was in the right direction. Multiple, and then always give your field's name. Okay. So this is the post text. But actually the names should actually reflect, they should reflect what we have in the database. So let me look at the post. Let me look at my model and see what I need to post. So it needs to reflect. So I look at the model here and I'll see my post needs to have a message and a media, right? So I'll call this message. And then I'll have a placeholder which basically says type what is in your mind. Okay, so I need this to also have, so I think that's it. And I also need to have, I need this user to upload a file. So let's see if this, if it's going to make us fast track things. File. Let's see if we can have an info file. Apparently, we might not have that. Okay, just a moment. Anyway, it doesn't have to look great for now. We can perfect it later. So what we can do is we just use the kawaida input file type. So we can just say file, okay? And we can give this, so we can put it like that. This one we don't need to have a closing tag. So this is self-closing. And then we can have a placeholder here for the media. So I can put a div here that is going to hold our media. So I can also explain other hooks like the use effect. So we need to make sure, let's first of all preview what this does. Oh, it's on the wrong part. We need to create a post page. So post.jsx. So everything that we have put here should be on the other side. So I'll just copy this and undo everything. Because we need to create a post note. So we'll come here and export default posts, and we put our return. We need to include to make sure that it's a function, and we return whatever we had on the other side. Okay, so and then we need to create a route for this. So we need to go to the app and create a route for the post. So we can come here and say, just to make sure that we just do things fast. I'm going to copy this and paste it here and just change here to post and make sure that this is also post. Of course, we need to import it, make sure that we've imported. So we have that route for post. And now let's preview this. So I'm going to save. And then, of course, now we can come here and just refresh. So this usually auto reloads. So we have a couple of things here that says we need to import. So if we don't import, you're going to get this kind of an error. So that says compile with the problems. Of course, we haven't imported most of these things, but we can do control space, and we can easily import them like that. So let's import everything that we need over here. Abby. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Okay, so yeah, importing. So finished importing that, and now we don't have any errors. So if I go to the post here, I'll be able to see now what I have been creating. So this is what I have. I need to reduce this a bit. It looks too big, so I will not concentrate much on how it looks. For now, I just want to just display the functionality. So maybe let's reduce this to, actually, let's just remove that. And also put this inside paper, probably. Let's use paper. Paper is just a component that elevates our view. You can actually look at the documentation. It's going to guide you on most of these things that I'm doing here. So that one does that, and also probably let me do a padding of, let's say 3. So that will make it look, it's not changing. maybe I should put that in SX and put it here. So this is what I'm putting here, what we call props. So props are basically how you pass data to a component. You pass data to a component using props. So we are passing this prop for SSX to this component paper. So it now looks like that. And now we have this, right? So we can work something about how to upload the media. So I'll come here and say, and create here, now use something called a state. So we talked about state. So we want the state to monitor the image that I want to select, right? So I can come here and say, I can come here and say const image, or I can call it media, like that, set media. So this is how we manage state using React. State is basically data that is bound to the components, right? So we use a hook called use state. So initially, if we wanted to work with state, we would use the class component. But now we can use state hook to manage that using in the functional component. So we can set that, and we can say we can use another hook here called use effect. So the use effect here is basically you use the use effect to work with information or data that is outside the component, right? So whenever you're working with data that is outside your component, you need to work with the use effect. So we'll use the use effect to check the image that the user has selected, right? So we use that, and it takes in a callback function, right, as the first argument. And the second argument, we want to see anytime the media changes, anytime this particular media changes, it needs to trigger this. Okay, it needs to trigger that. Or maybe we can call this, instead of media, let's call it file, right? So the file is what the user selects. That's what the user selects. So every time the user changes that, we need to take the file. So let me create another function here that uses on select, another event on select file. So on the select files here, it's an event. So whenever the user selects a file, so that one we can tie it to the input field for the file. So you can say on change. So on change, it calls on select, right? So on select here, we are going to set media, right? So we'll try to see what the user selects. So we can do a console log evt to just see how that works. So console log makes logs whatever you log here. So this file media changed. So that means that refresh. That means that if I select something here, if I go here and choose an image, for example, I take this image over here. So this now gives me this object that I can work with. Okay, so this object has files, right? I can be able to see the file the user has selected using JavaScript. So I can come here and say const selected file equals to event dot not there. We need to code that in here. We need to code that in here. Event dot target. Again, target is the field dot files. And because you can select multiple files, so files is usually an array, a list of files that you are selecting. So we need the first file. We only need one file. So this file we need to convert it to a URL. Right? So we need to convert that to a URL. So we can say const file reader equals to new file reader. So this is a browser API that helps us read files. So file reader I hope that is the case. So we don't need to import this because it's a browser API. It comes with the browser. So, and then, so we are saying file reader dot read, actually. I'm not sure if this is the way we should get it. Yeah, so read as data URL. So we are reading that as data URL. And when we read it as data URL, we need to actually, we don't actually need this much. And actually, let's return this to media again. So set media. So once we read it, because it's an asynchronous process, so we need to say file reader dot onload. So we give it a callback, another event again. And of course, now we set the media. So we set media. And what we are setting here is event again dot target dot result. So this media over here, we can come and display that image here where we have this div. So we can say, as long as we have something. So this is the other way of including JavaScript inside of JSX. We need to make sure that we surround it with the curly braces. So we can say if the media it has something, because initially it is going to be undefined. It doesn't have anything initially. So if it's defined, then so using that and display an image which has a source, and this particular source now is going to be the URL that we just read. And of course, we can make sure that this width of this image is probably 100% so that it doesn't take over all the space that we have. So that basically, we haven't yet posted yet, but it's just a way of just displaying, making sure that the user experience, that the user actually knows what they are posting. So if I select that, I'm able to see, so it says read as data URL on file. So we need to include selected file. We need to pass it over here, to pass it over there so that we are reading from the file. So let's refresh and redo that again. So we select an image. Now we can display so that the user can see what they are posting. And of course, now they can type here a full stack developer. So this one can be a very long list. It can be a long list. So you can increase the number of lines, the number of rows that a user can type. So we can come here and add max rows to be, let's say, you just need, a user can type up to 4 rows. So is this possible? Text field, multi, something that is not working, but anyway, you can increase that number of rows and the image. So again, we can now have the button for posting. Down here, we can have, let's do a break and then a button, which has a variant of outlined or contained, and the type of this button is a submit button. It's important because we are submitting a form. So we need to include and then post. And you can post that. Yeah, so once we type, we can do the post. And now we also need to create now the event for posting. So that gives us that. So we might not be needing the use effect, but we might actually be needing now a function to do a post, which is, it has to be asynchronous. Async function do post, maybe let's say do post. It also accepts an event because it's going to be an event. So we type this to on submit of the form. So form here dot on submit. We are calling that. And of course, we also always need to do, especially when you're doing a single page application, you always need to do prevent default because you don't want the page to reload. And then of course, now we can have our form data again. Const fd, which is new form data, to format our body, our request for the body, and then we need to include what? The form itself. So event.target. And now after we've done this, we can now post this, right? So we can use the effect here for our API. So const API client equals to use API. Okay. So that now we can call it. We can say now we are doing a post. We need to capture the response because the server is going to respond. So that is, the response is going to be equals to the post that we are doing, and we need to specify the endpoint. So the endpoint for us here is, we can counter check that in the URLs. The registered URL for the posts is this one, posts. So we are doing a post to that endpoint, and the data that we are sending is whatever we get from FD. Whatever we are getting from FD is the data that we are sending. But now the question is, how do we know, how does the backend know who is sending? Remember, we generated a token and we saved it. So it's always advisable that you can actually pass that token here. So you can pass it as another URL configuration, and you can pass the headers. So the authentication headers, which now is the token, needs to be passed in the headers. The headers are what in the network is the information that you're going to see from here. So if I select a particular request over here, whatever is on the headers is what we specify, and what we put is the header is extra information that we are telling the browser, right? We are telling the browser to authenticate. We are using this token to authenticate this user, so we put that in the header area. Okay, so that's what we put here, headers. And of course, now we can pass that as an object. And because it's an authentication, we need to pass an authorization header. Okay. And now our authorization header is going to be, you need to make sure that you are specifying the bearer of this token is the person who is doing the post. So we can retrieve that token from the session storage. Get item. So this is retrieving. So we are retrieving the token. So every request that needs authorization, we need to always pass the token at the very top, at the headers. Okay. So we are saying the bearer of this token is the one who is posting. So the server is going to recognize this particular user using the token. But then, because we don't want to always be doing this in all the requests, that every time we want to do a post, we have to write this. So we can counter that by adding something we call interceptors. Right? So we can create interceptors that intercept all the requests that go to the server. And how we do that is through through Axios. So I told you that I will talk about this. So we create interceptors that are going to intercept all the requests. So we say any request that comes in we should trigger this particular function. Okay. So this function does what? It checks. If the endpoint is a sign up or sign in, you don't have to add any headers. So we can list all the URLs that don't require to be authenticated here, right? But any URL that needs authentication, we don't need to list it over here. So it's going to happen, it's going to add the headers, the authorization headers over here. They are going to be added. Okay, so we add that, right? So this is the bearer, so we are always getting it from here. Okay, there's also other information, that the type of information that we are sending, it's an application JSON. But now the information that I'm sending here is not in JSON format because it has an image. So we need to change that a bit. So I think for this one, I'll just say, I'll just include the headers. I'll just include, so what I'm going to do is, we can just see what we can do. Maybe let me include, let me include, what should I include? The content type. This content type is a bit different. So I'll include the content type to be of a different, because I have an image. I have an image type that I'm uploading. So we can't upload an image in JSON format. So we need to say that we are working with, I have to confirm. I have to confirm the type. So let me keep on type. Is it multi-part? I have to check that online. Just say HTML form encrypt type. So I need it to be, I'm going to look at that from, yeah, so I need it to be multi-part form data. So that's what I need to post this information as. So I'll include that here in the content type, plus the M left out. So I need to make sure that it is multi, because I'm handling images. If there are no images, I would have just gone with the JSON application JSON. So multi-part, and then something else I need also to change here. I need to confirm if the type is configured. So if we already have the type, we don't need to specify. So we can check that if config.headers content type. So we can check that using that content type. If the content type is already set, we don't need to set it. So you can actually use the or statement. So this one basically checks if the type is already set, we don't need to set it again. And we have to make sure that this is okay. If it is not set, it's going to use the application JSON. So we can make sure that this is actually correctly formatted. Right, so again, so that happens. So let's do a console.log of the response. Hopefully this is going to run without any errors. Cross fingers and pray. So we'll put this one we can't put, actually we can't put whatever a breakpoint. We are just going to just hope it's going to go successfully. So so we say it's great being a full stack developer, and then I select an image, and okay, there's a bit that I'm missing out. I need to give this a name. If I want this to be successful, I need to make sure that the name of this is actually media. The same thing that we have on our model. So it's media as it is there. So that is media. So I'll save. Save. And now, just to be sure that this has what we want, it has a name. Of course, it has a name. All right. So, and now I'm going to do a post. of course, I was overseeing this. So there's an error that says Axios error. It says bad response. So we can go further and inspect this from the network here. So we can check the network to just try to find out what the issue is. So it's a 500, means it's a server error. But what is in the response? In the response, it says, the response says what? Append a slash. You called this URL via post, but the URL doesn't end with a slash. So we need to include a forward slash. We need to include a forward slash here. Here we need to add that. There's a way you can skip that particular thing, but I can't really remember right now. So let's try that again. So let's do another post. Has it responded? Let's confirm. Yeah, I'm not sure. We need also to wait. We need to wait for this response. So we need to do an await so that we can see the whole process. So let's do it again. Yeah, so we have a response. So the response is here. It actually now gives us what we have posted, and we can confirm that. In the admin. So we can look at the posts here, and we can look at, now we have our data. It is great to being a full stack developer, and this is the image that we uploaded. So there's something else probably I didn't mention is I am not saving all my files here. I'm leveraging on a third-party storage. It's called Cloudinary. So I had to install Cloudinary here. I had to install Cloudinary for my storage. So my images are not being saved in this machine, but rather they are being posted in the Cloudinary storage. Cloudinary is a storage that you can sign up with. So if you go to Cloudinary, it's an image storage that you can leverage on if you don't have enough space. So you can just use this particular API for not Codility, but Cloudinary, like that. So this one is where I'm saving all the images. As you can see, the URL of this image. The URL of this image is where is my image? As you can see, this particular URL here is from Cloudinary, right? So all my images are getting posted there, and I had to install this particular Python package, this one, Cloudinary, and I also installed Django Cloudinary. So once you have that, in your model, you can specify the field that's going to hold the image. You can put it as data as type what? As it's basically a URL. So that is not, it's just URL. It's just a text field. And what else did I do? Let's see, the serializer for post. Not the serializer, but rather the view. So in the view here, not actually much that we change. As long as you have those two, then your images are going to be handled properly. So we have the post is done. So the other thing is to preview, right? So we need to list all the posts that are done. So the other thing here to do below here is basically to, because this is the response that was logged over here. So the other thing is just to clear the form. And to clear the form, we can just say set media, and we can set the media to undefined. And we can also clear the form. So we can say it's good to define the form here. Const form equals to event.target And then we can replace that here. And of course, now we can reset the form. Form.reset. .reset. Control Z. So the other thing is to retrieve my posts. So I can still use the same page to retrieve my posts. So I can create another state here and say posts and set posts. So whenever you're working with data, you need to have the state to manage the state. So use state again. And now, because we are getting the post now, here we can now use the use effect. Use effect to basically now fetch our data, because we are fetching external data. So we use, and then we, with the use effect, the second parameter dictates how this function is going to be called. So if you have an empty array like this, it means it's going to be called once. If you don't pass this one, it means it's going to be called every time there's a change in state. It's going to of course, these things we will explain probably when you take up a course at Moringa, so we'll explain the nitty-gritties of this, but just know this function is going to be called once, and what we are doing here, we are again calling the API, right? So we do what we say API. This time around, we don't need to have an await, and we can say get. So what we are getting here is the posts. Those are the things that we are getting. And then we are saying then, after the posts are found, so we get a response. So this time we are not saving the response on that side, but we are getting it using a callback. So we are saying, if you get these posts, as long as the posts have data, so if response.data, if there's some data in the response, we can set that as the posts. So we can set that response.data as the post. And of course, now these posts that are being sent, we can put them under the paper here. We can do a loop, right? So we can say we are looping the posts dot map. So using a map here is an iterator method, and we are getting the posts that has been posted, and we are rendering a card. So I'm going to go in my material UI and look for a card. So I go here and look for a card. So find card. So this is the card I want. I'm just rushing through because we are way past time. I want to finish exactly at 9. So I will use that code. I'll just basically copy this code for card. So I'll just copy up to here and use this as my card. So I'll put it here. Hopefully that code is okay. It seems to be having an error. I think it's okay. It's going to change. So I'll just collapse this, and collapse this to just see if it closes the way we don't need that. So we have the post, and whenever you iterate components, you need to make sure they have a key. For other things that I will not be able to explain why at this particular point in time, but just know you need to have a key whenever you are doing a loop, and we need to display the media. So let's say we don't need this part. Do we? So we don't need that. Here is the content, so we might put the post, the message over here. So we can say post post.message, and then of course our actions here can be like, share, whatever we want. I guess we also need an image. So for the image here, we can use the media. So post.media. So that's for the image. And So we are getting that. We can put this inside a function to just trigger. You can put it a function here that says get posts. So this get posts can be called immediately here. So we can replace that with that. And of course, every time we do a post, for it to be displayed immediately, we can still get data again over here. We can get the posts over there. So cross fingers, we see if this is going to work. Of course, we have, we need to import card media. We need to import what we just pasted. So control space, card, control space, media, control space, content, control space, typography. I think that one is already there. Control space for actions. So yeah, let's see. To refresh. So cannot read properties of undefined. We need to check if there is any posts. So we need to have posts are there, then we can render them. If they are posts, we can render it. If there isn't, we can just leave it as it is. Of course, now we have the two posts that we did. So those are the two posts that we did. We can format this a bit better by adding, let's remove this to be 100%. And you can say the margin also, the margin top to be let's say 4. Margin top to be 4. So that now will create our posts. Right? So let's do another post and see how that works. So we'll do another post for this, and we can post it. Let's see if the whole process works as we expect it to. I'm not sure if it has done the post. I'm not sure, but I think you get the whole flow of that. So I will try and complete this and push it to the GitHub repository, so you can also see how we can do the likes, the share, and all those other things. But we can end it there, and we can call it a day. So I'll make all the updates in the Git repository, so that you can be able to track that. And I'll also document everything so that you can also be able to see what actually went behind the scene. Are there any questions as we close? Any questions? Are you guys still there? Do some reactions, anything to just show that you have been following. Okay. Right. Kindly push the code as well. Okay, I can see in the chat you guys are saying that was a wonderful